Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ask an Atheist. I'm your host Ethan, and my guest tonight is Jason from Dragons and Genesis. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. As I told you in the green room, I had to fly home from work, so I may have to, in going forward, push these podcasts back like a half hour later because I don't want to keep my guests waiting. Of course, fortunately, even though there was traffic, there was no accidents or construction, so good there. What I was saying to you earlier, though, is I'm surprised we've known each other for actually quite a while now,
Yeah.
and we've never worked together. How has that not happened?
Yeah, I think we crossed paths maybe once or twice on Chris Mallard's show, like way
Oh,
back in like
yes,
the COVID days, like 50 years
yes.
ago or something. However long ago COVID was, I don't know. Um, so yeah, I think we're on one of his episodes together
I think
once
you're
or
right.
twice.
Yeah.
But I'm old, so my memory isn't that great. So
I
I
bet
could
I'm
be
older than
hallucinating
you.
the whole thing.
I got the grades to prove it. I'm older than you.
Oh, how old are you?
Oh, I hate saying my age. I'm 43.
Oh, dude, I got you beat, man. I'm gonna be 46 next week.
Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah,
I pegged you for mid 30s.
yeah. Everyone does that. I have like six gray hairs in my beard. Unfortunately, like my hair all left whenever I was in my early 20s. Like by the time I was 23, I was bald. It all just like migrated south. So,
See, but
uh,
you know what? You can pull it off. I can't pull it off. So I started balding at like 19, 20, but I immediately jumped on medication so I would stop balding. And fortunately, good so far. So yeah. Oh, you're
yeah, yeah.
frozen. Are you still
I,
there?
oh,
Oh, there we go. Okay, you're back.
Okay,
Sorry.
weird. Yeah, no, yeah, back in like 2003, my hair started coming out, and I just grabbed a razor and hacked it all off, and been shaving my head ever since. So,
At
you
least you
know,
can pull it off. I've got
uh,
a massive scar right here on my head and two
oh,
indentations, so I can't pull off being bald.
oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So,
Um,
I've been curious. I've never asked you this before. Before we dive into other topics, where did the name Dragons in Genesis come from? Keep in mind, I am a biblical idiot, so if this is a Bible thing, I don't get it.
Yeah. So when I first started the show, it was sort of a jab at Ken Ham's whole answers in Genesis thing. Because I'm like, okay, you got all these
Oh,
people, you're going to Genesis to look for answers, but I'm going to Genesis to look for the mythology because there's actually a lot of rich mythology in the Bible. It's just sort of hidden. And a
okay.
big focus of my show is to kind of dig that out so that you can understand this is mythology that has been rewritten to look like history. And so, yeah, that's really what it is. It's the name really is just kind of shining a light on the fact that there's mythology in the Bible. There
Right.
are dragons in the book of Genesis.
Do
So
you think it's an important distinction when we say the Bible and God is mythology and not a fairy tale?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you get into like the different classifications of literature, I mean, you got fables, folklore, fairy tales, mythology, things like that. And mythology is really any story in which gods are, involved. And that's what a large portion of the Bible is. It's about the actions of gods you know, in the ancient past involving the Hebrew people. And so, yeah, it is very much mythology. There's some folklore involved, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people calling it a fairy tale is done as to I don't know, just kind of downplay what the book is.
I
It's
agree.
kind of
I
done
don't
like
like
it's being
saying fairy tale.
insulting. Yeah,
I do. I think it's kind of condescending to uh, tell someone their belief is a fairy tale.
absolutely. And that's really gonna like whoever you're having this conversation with, if you're talking to a Christian, and you're like, oh yeah, your religion is a fairy tale. don't expect to make any headway with them.
No,
It's not happening. Like
No.
you have just painted yourself as their enemy, and any conversation you have with them going forward, you're going to start off on the back foot. And
Yes.
just because you decided to throw in a snide remark, and that's something I make sure to not have in my podcast. I try to approach these topics very gently because I want religious listeners, and about
Same.
25 or 30% of my audience is Christian.
Really?
Yeah, I've got a lot of religious people who listen to my show.
That's awesome. We do have our first religious person in the comment section. Knights of Kedosh, I will get to your comments later. So, Jason, how long have you been an atheist for?
Almost as long as I've been bald. Yeah, like right before my hair started to turn loose, I started reading the Bible, and shortly after I began, I started to have questions, and the answers I got were rather dismissive, unsatisfactory. There's a lot of different ways I could describe the answers because there was a lot of different types of answers, and none of them really answered anything. So I started looking into the thing for myself, and that meant buying Bible commentaries, buying books about different books of the Bible, buying course material from a Christian seminary. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that this was a book of mythology. And keep in mind, the majority of the material I was reading came from Christian authors. These were books written by Christian theologians, and these books completely deconverted me.
Okay.
Yeah, it took several years, the whole journey, and I'm not exactly sure when it happened. But by the time I finished the Old Testament, I was an atheist. And by the time I finished the New Testament, I was convinced that no one, in that section of the Bible had ever met Jesus, which is, I might add, the scholarly consensus, that the New Testament was written entirely by people who had never met the man. I agree with you, my limited knowledge on that. So, but a clarifying question: are you a mythicist or no? I kind of go back and forth a little bit, but whenever I take a really hard look at the topic, I think if you're going to try to convince me that Jesus existed as a historical person, I want to know where the evidence is, the compelling evidence to move a person in that direction. I've yet to see it. A lot of it kind of starts with the assumption that he was, and then asking people to disprove it or to say that early Christianity fits better with a founder. Things like that. Which things like that, statements like that do make sense, but that doesn't mean that this particular guy existed. Right. You could have a completely different founder. It'd be like saying, okay, well, Mormonism fits better with a founder. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the founder had to be Moroni the angel. It could have just been Joseph Smith. Right. Christianity, could it have just come from Peter? Or someone like him? And so when I look at it, I'm not convinced that there was a guy. At the same time, I kind of don't care. I'm interested in the stories. Where did when you look at where the stories came from, none of the stories come from anyone who met him. Like the Gospels are all anonymous. They're all written by, people outside of the area. They're all written by Greek-speaking, educated people. These are not fishermen. They didn't,
Right.
Peter didn't write, let's say that, the disciple Peter is a real guy. We don't have anything from him. We have a gospel in his name that was written in the 2nd century. It didn't make the cut. We've got a couple letters attributed to him, which are both written by other people, and they're not even written by the same person. 1 Peter and 2 Peter are completely different authors.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's actually the the case. Most of the works of the New Testament are forgeries. Half the letters attributed to Paul were written decades after he died. That's like the letter of James. We're led to believe it was like James, the brother of Jesus, who wrote the thing, but it doesn't say that. It just says it's written by some guy named James. If you're trying to claim authority and you're going to use the name of Jesus' brother, you would say, yep, this is written by James, the brother of Jesus. But it doesn't say that anywhere in there. It's just some guy named James that early Christians would have recognized, but he's not claiming to be any particular James. And like some of these works didn't even have names attached to them in the beginning. Like the Gospels, they all had other titles. Like the Gospel of Mark was called the Gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. And that's what it was called for over 100 years. And then it got the name Mark attached to it because they were trying to differentiate all these different varying Gospels floating around, and they just started throwing names onto them.
Okay, and it's Mark, Paul. What are the other? There's 4 total, right?
So the Gospels you have Mark.
So
we have 4 canonical Gospels. There was about 40 that we know of. We got 4 that made the cut. Mark was the earliest. Then there's Matthew, Luke, and John. Now, these are not 4 different people writing their own version of events. Some person whose name we do not know wrote this gospel that, nearly a century later would be called the Gospel of Mark. And then another person came along and wanted to make Jesus more like Moses. And so he took the vast majority of Mark and copied it verbatim. And then he added a bunch of scenes and he rearranged some stuff. And that gospel became known as Matthew. Another person came along sometime later and looked at a copy of both Matthew and Mark and copied material from both and then rearranged and added his own material, and that created the gospel known as Luke. Okay, and if you look, the majority of Matthew and Luke, the majority of both of those gospels are copied verbatim directly from Mark. Okay, so these are not independent sources. They're literally, Matthew is a rewriting, it's an expansion of Mark. Luke is an expansion of Mark, Matthew. John is the only one that actually did a rewrite. He was aware of these Gospels, especially Luke. And then he wanted to write his own thing, and he wanted Jesus to be very different. His theology is drastically different. And he took some of the same scenes. He took some and he kind of turned them on their heads. He took things that were originally parables and he turned them into things that were supposed to have actually happened. And he just rewrote, he basically wrote a new gospel. And so that's what we have. And then, of course, we have like over 30 other gospels that either survive in fragments, or we have entire copies, or we only have mentions and quotations of them. And of course, they were all anonymous. And then, of course, we have like 13 letters written by Paul, who was an apostle who went around and converted a bunch of people and established a bunch of churches all over the Mediterranean. And half of those letters are forgeries. And then we have other letters written by other people. James supposedly wrote a letter. We don't know which James, and we don't even know if that name was originally attached. And then we have a couple letters from Peter. Both of those are forgeries, and they're written by two different people. And we have 3 letters from a John, and I don't even think those 3 are all written by the same person, and those also are forgeries. And then we also have this letter to the Hebrews. No one even knows who is supposed to have written that, though some people claim it was Paul. It clearly isn't. And then finally we have the book of Revelation, which is written by another guy named John, who is not supposed to be any of the other Johns. He's just some guy named John who lives on the island of Patmos. And so none of these people who actually wrote any of these Gospels were people who met Jesus. It's anonymous authors or people who, by their own admission, discovered Jesus through visions and things like that. So yeah, that's where the religion comes from. It comes from people at the end of the first century, people who might not have even been born at the time of the crucifixion, who have like converted to this religion. And they mostly identify themselves as Jews. At this time, Judaism and Christianity weren't separate things. They were just sectarian Jews, and they've done all this stuff. They're caught up in this messianic doomsday branch of Judaism, and they're writing a bunch of material for it. And then decades later, people are drawing upon this to prop up their religion. And as more people convert, they're using this material, in their worship. And eventually, a couple centuries later, this big, collection of books kind of becomes a sort of official collection. Though that wasn't even the first time we had an official Christian Bible. The Christian Bible we have now is not the first official canon. It's a response to an earlier canon, which itself was a response to an earlier canon. The first Christian Bibles, like we don't have those. They were all destroyed. We kind of know what was in
on that a little bit.
Yeah, there was this guy named Marcion of Sinope, and he had some. We would consider him pretty strange beliefs, but. He was, one of these sectarian Christians, and he created the first sort of canonical collection of Christian writings. It was a thing that resembled part of the Gospel of Luke. About 25% of the Gospel of Luke was added on later. Like the first few chapters of Luke did not exist when it was first written. That's a later insertion. The ending of Luke came later, a bunch of parts in the middle. These things were all added in. So anyway, he had this chunk that was kind of the core of the Gospel of Luke. Some of the letters of Paul, but they also seem to be slightly different, and a few other things. And that was essentially his gospel, or his Bible. So it was a lot shorter. It was only a handful of books. And he had this group. It was called the Marcionites. And then later, other Christian groups decided they were all heretics, and all of their material had to be rounded up and burned. And so the earliest Christian Bible, Christians burned them. And then they were saying, we're going to make our own Bibles. And so
Sorry, real quick.
They did that.
What period of time was this roughly at when
Marcion was mid-2nd century.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted some clarification on when this happened.
Yeah. Like the early church history is extremely messy. It was basically just one group after another, growing and falling in power and constantly bickering, to the point of bloodshed with all the other, variations of Christianity. Like the author of Mathew would have stoned the author of John if you ever met him in the streets. They were like from very different groups of Christianity. And so it was all just sectarian bickering. And eventually, things kind of started to calm down as, a group would kind of get really big and kind of swallow up other groups and say, okay, we'll let you live, we'll allow you to kind of join us, but you're going to have to tone down some of this rhetoric you have. And they kind of just sort of swallowed up other groups, pushed others out, and things like that. Strange groups of Christians kind of migrated all over the area. Some of them went as far as like Ethiopia. There was like Christians all over the place, and they were all very different.
So, at what point did Christianity and Judaism start like separating or become, two separate things?
It really happened. It seems to have really happened about 200 years before what we would call the birth of Christianity. So we're talking like about 160 BC.
Okay.
You had a lot of division in Judaism around that point, and some of these groups that were not really welcome in the temple, they were producing a lot of material that would later become extremely important to Christians. Things like the first book of Enoch, the books of Maccabees, the book of Jubilees, different things like that. Things that are in some versions of the Christian Old Testament, but are not in the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
And so you had this sectarian split in Judaism, and Christianity kind of just seems to have grown out of these sectarian Jewish movements. Like if you went into certain Jewish communities in like the year 30 AD, like if you went and talked to the Essenes or the Ebionites, or some other little sectarian Jewish group, if you went and looked at them, you'd be like, I think these are Christians. And they would have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Like when we look at these sectarian Jewish groups in the mid first century, we don't know which one Christianity came from because there are so many it could be. And it looks like Christianity is a grab bag of a bunch of different ones. And unfortunately, Christians, they erased so much of their own records and documentation. History books that were being written at the time, books on religion and mystery cults. Christians later came, gathered all that stuff up and destroyed it. So there's almost like this blackout period involving the early workings of Christianity because Christians deleted it in later centuries. And because of that, like we can see Christianity like in the mid and late second century. And then we can look back 100 years before and we can see a bunch of different groups that look very similar. And we just can't, it's like a missing link. We just can't quite connect the dots. We say, okay, this looks like the ancestor to Christianity, but so does this other one, and so does this other one. And so I don't think you can really point to a specific event and say this is when Judaism and Christianity split. I think it was a thing that was going on for a great deal of time. And it just gradually, a group of Jews at some point became identified as Christians, but their severance from the Jewish temple had been a thing that had been going on for decades or even centuries by that point. And of course, a lot of this is sort of, just hypothesized because the records are to a large degree lost. We simply don't have a lot of it because a lot of Christian record keepers deliberately erase these things. Like there'd be chapters of a book involving like religion that was devoted to the study of mystery cults, and Christians simply removed that entire section from the book and destroyed it. And every copy we have is missing that section because the Christians deleted it. Yeah. It was they were very methodical about it, and they were very efficient. And so, yeah,
So
we're missing some stuff.
Like a biblical expert, you're also a historian.
Oh, I would not call myself an expert or a historian. I'm just an autistic dude who latched onto this as a special interest and went down the rabbit hole, and I've been stuck in it for about 25 years now. I don't have a degree in any of this.
You're being too humble.
I just have a library.
So earlier you mentioned what? ADHD. Hang on, brain fart. That's what I was going to ask you. So how did because I don't remember your exact wording, and I don't want to misquote you, but you made a phrase along the lines of like certain things didn't get chose to be included in the Bible. I've heard that before, where stuff was just decided to be left out. Is that true? And if so, like, how did they decide what to include in the Bible and what not to include in the Bible?
A lot of it was sort of organic. There's a thing that always pops up in discussions like this, and that's this idea that during like the Council of Nicaea, they brought out all these different texts, and this whole big group of bishops voted on which books would go in the Bible, and then that became the Christian canon. And I blame Dan Brown, the guy who wrote all those different books like the Da Vinci Code and stuff like that, because he really popularized that particular idea. That never happened.
Okay.
Like as early as the mid-2nd century, there were bishops who were talking about their favorite books and making a list that looks just like our New Testament, saying this is what we like. But it wasn't canonical. And basically every group of Christians had their own, favorite books that they used whenever they were preaching. That's actually how we ended up with all our different gospels. If you were in a congregation, you weren't exposed to a bunch of different gospels. You had the gospel that your preacher happened to have, the one that they liked. So you had the Gospel of Mark floating around. That's our earliest one. Okay. But this other dude comes along and goes, okay, I like some of the things he did there, but I'm going to do it better. And so he reworks it, and it becomes our Gospel of Mathew. And that was for a different audience. And those people in that area didn't know anything about the Gospel of Mark. They only knew about the Gospel of Mathew. And it wasn't called the Gospel of Mathew. It had its own title, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that was. And that was just the gospel. It was the one gospel that you had. And then this other person came along and modified that and came up with what we call Luke. And that's how it went. Each community had their own gospel.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then later these things they kind of started to come together, and then they're like, okay, let's to appease multiple communities, we'll have multiple gospels, and we'll just put them in a collection. Okay. And in the late 4th century, they were like, what, we really need to get a lot of people on the same page, and so they said, okay, let's start mass producing these collections. And so they say, okay, we'll have like a list. And by this point, it had sort of already congealed into what we would recognize as the New Testament, not through any official decree. Just these things were kind of rising in popularity. And this was the collection that appealed to a greater audience. It made compromises with more groups. It roped in a lot more people. And so they start, we need to get every copy of the Gospel of Mark that we can get our hands on, and our scribes are going to go in and they'll each grab a copy and they'll start making copies from that. And they start doing this, and they produce, 50 or 100 Bibles that are then sewn together, and all the different bishops around the area, around the Roman Empire, each kind of had their own collection. We have 2 or 3 of these Bibles, and no 2 have the same books in them. Even then, as they're trying to kind of standardize things, if you look at these books, there are books in there that you've never heard of. Like a book called the Didache. Go to the bookstore, buy a Bible. It will not have the Didache in it. I've got a copy. I've got copies of one of these old Bibles on a shelf, and it's got the Didache. The Shepherd of Hermas. You've probably seen the little thing on cartoons where they have the little devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and they're going back and forth trying to sway you in different directions. That's where it comes from. It comes from the Shepherd of Hermas. It's in some of these early Christian Bibles. It's not in modern Christian Bibles, because gradually that fell out of favor too. And so it was starting to congeal as early as the 2nd century, but it really kind of took hold in the 4th century. And by the 5th century, some of these other books kind of just got left behind. And we pretty much ended up with the Bible that we have today, or at least the table of contents that we have today. Things have still been changed since then. Like the scene where the woman is caught in adultery and all the Jews are about to stone her, and Jesus walks up and he's like, okay, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And then they're all like, oh, and they're all ashamed and they all walk off. That shows up in like, I don't know, like chapter 8 or 9 of John. Well, it eventually shows up in the Gospel of John. For the first 600 years, it's not in the Gospel of John. It was added in centuries later. It was a story about a completely different guy, and I think it was Apollonius of Tyana. And Christians just really liked the story, and they were like, what if Jesus did that? And someone just inserted it into the Gospel of John. About 20% of the Gospel of Luke does not appear in, like it was added in, much later.
Okay.
The last, there's actually multiple endings for the Gospel of Mark. In Mark's Gospel, the women, they go to the tomb, they find it empty, Jesus isn't there. They run off in fear, and they never tell anybody what they saw, the end. All the things where Jesus appears to people after his resurrection, and he tells the disciples to go out and work miracles and pick up venomous serpents and drink poison and everything else, that wasn't there. Like, that was added centuries later. It was inserted into the Gospel of Mark to give it a longer ending. And there were, I think 3 different endings that were invented and tacked on to the ending of Mark. And it went on like that for centuries, for up until about the year 800, somewhere around there. People were still adding stuff into the New Testament.
So how did they make these decisions? That I mean, I guess to the best of your knowledge, like how did these all of a sudden, like someone wants to include this or someone wants to include this? How is that decided?
Oh, it was very simple. So you've got a scribe. He's got a copy of this text, and he's making his own copy. So he grabs a sheet of paper and he's copying the thing line by line, and he gets to this one scene and he's like, what would be really good here? This. And he just writes it in.
Seriously?
Yeah. And sometimes it was an accident. Somebody would write a notation in the margins. I think that there's one, I believe it's in 2 Timothy, where it says that women should not be allowed to speak with authority in church. That's that's up to the men. Women must remain silent. I don't remember the exact quote. What's funny is that was originally a marginal notation. Someone, probably some dude who was like pissed off at his wife was like, women can't talk to me, blah, blah, blah. And he just grumbled while he scribbled this into the margins. Well, then later, scribes copying this, they see this in the margins and they think, okay, when someone was making their copy, they accidentally skipped a line. Where does it go? Because that would sometimes happen. You'd copy the thing and you would accidentally skip a line. And then you would just, I can't leave out, the words of Jesus. I got to put them in here. So you just write them into the margins, okay? Well, so at some point, someone saw this and thought, okay, well, this obviously goes in the text, but where? And so when they made their copy, they put that in. But then another person copying from the same manuscript inserted it into a different part of the page. We have copies of 2 Timothy from, I want to say like the 600s or 700s, with that line in 3 different places on the page, where people inserted the marginal notation into the body of the text, but they didn't know where it went, so they just found a good place for it, and that's where they kind of shoehorned it in. And so, that's just how things happened. People just, you make a note of what you think should be in there, and then someone later on says, oh, this was supposed to be in there, and so you just copy it in. Or you want something to be in there, so you just add it. I mean, the Gospel of Mathew is someone saying, you know what, I like what Mark did here, but Jesus needs to be more Jewish. And they just, increase the length of the gospel by 50%, just adding stuff. And then Luke is doing the same thing. And then John just rewrote the whole thing. So it's, they were not trying to make an accurate verbatim copy.
Okay.
They felt perfectly fine making alterations. And when you go back to like the first 1,000 years of Christianity and you look at all of the different ancient documents we have, all the manuscripts, and you put them side by side, and you count up the number of discrepancies, an actual survey on this was done. You count up the number of discrepancies between the text where changes have been made, both great and small. It numbers more discrepancies than there are words in the New Testament.
Are you serious?
Yes. There's that much. Like, you take any two manuscripts from before the invention of the printing press and you put them side by side, and you will not get through the first page without seeing changes. Some are just errors, spelling errors, things like that. Some are major changes where people have modified theology to fit, their beliefs.
Okay.
And like I said, okay. I'll give you two examples real quick. So in the Old Testament, in the book of, Lamentations, it's these poems about how horrible it is to be a Jew because, Jerusalem got destroyed by the Babylonians and all this stuff. And it's just basically just venting their frustration and their misery. Okay. Well, some of these poems are written as acrostics, meaning like the first line begins with the letter A, the next line begins with the letter B and C, and so on. Okay. Well, something strange happened during the Babylonian exile. The Jews living in Babylon, their alphabet changed. Two of the letters swapped places. Think of it like the letter O and the letter P flipping around. LMNOP, but then now they are LMNPO. Okay, and that's the order of their alphabet. It changed during, the 80 or so years they were, captive in Babylon. Okay. Well, when they came back and they encountered these poems written by the Jews that were left behind, they had a problem. These acrostics were written using the old form of their alphabet.
Okay.
And for a couple centuries, they were copying them in that order. But one group of Jews decided, no, we're going to fix it. And they took these two verses and they swapped the places of them to reflect the new order of their alphabet. And it kind of makes the poem read a bit wonky because you just took two verses and swapped places, okay? And so that was, they're trying to take this poem and make it match the new order of their alphabet. And so that's one deliberate change, that we can see, and we can see about, roughly when it happened. And we know the reason of it. Another one is the height of Goliath. All the documents before about 1,000 years ago, Goliath is, I think, like 4 cubits and a span. It basically means he's about 6.5 feet tall. After that, the documents by a specific group of Jews, it's 6 cubits in a span, or about 9.5 feet tall.
Okay.
And so the height of Goliath in documents preserved by one group of Jews changes at some point between about 500 AD and 1000 AD, somewhere around there. Because we have copies of the Old Testament from before then, and we have copies after then. And somewhere in that period, the height of Goliath got increased. And he gets like 3 feet taller, and he now becomes this huge giant. Not that 6.5 feet tall wouldn't have been huge for someone in the Iron Age. Most people were only about 5 and a couple inches at that point. But
Wait, really?
that's
There's
a far.
that much of a height difference?
Oh yeah, yeah. Hell, before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of Europeans were pretty small. It's really the beef market that helped people get, a lot of people worldwide were about the height of people from like North Korea until fairly recently.
So I'd be considered tall.
Oh yeah,
not right now, but back then I'd be considered tall because I'm 5'10".
Yeah. Oh yeah. And what's funny is you look at things just from like the Civil War, and you can see that a lot of things, like the average height of people, just 150 years ago, was significantly shorter than today. But yeah, so it's like the height of Goliath. They changed it for some reason, maybe just to make him bigger. So he'd be more of a threat, and David's kill would be, that much more impressive. So that's a change that we know occurred. And we don't know exactly when, but this one group of Jews, in the documents they had, this change occurred. And so the Bible is like it's continuing to evolve today. Like go grab.
It still is. I thought it was already like.
Oh no! Look, go grab a Gideon's Bible from any hotel room, okay, and then get on eBay and try to find a Gideon's Bible from like, I don't know, the 1970s. Okay, so these will be King James Bibles put out by the Gideons. So you'll have the same version of the Bible by the same publication company from the same ministry. And if you put them side by side and start flipping through the pages, you will see minute differences within the first chapter of Genesis. I know because I've done this. I've grabbed two Gideon's Bibles that were printed about 40 years apart and made comparisons, and I found differences within chapter 1. Bibles are constantly being modified. There's no one.
I knew they
Bible.
were. I didn't know they were still doing that now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I feel like a baby atheist now that I didn't know that.
Yeah. As much as the Bible informs theology, theology informs the Bible, like to the same degree. Constantly Bibles are being reprinted, and there are changes, both great and small, to the wording, to the message. Things about like the treatment of women and slaves is drastically toned down in a lot of the Bibles that have come out in the last 20 years, for obvious reasons. And so. I don't understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Here's what I don't understand, and maybe I'm lacking information on this, but how can women be Christians knowing
I don't know.
the Bible views them as second-class citizens? Do you have any input or thoughts on that? I know we obviously neither one of us can speak for women. I'm just curious of your thoughts.
Yeah,
on that.
From what I've seen, I don't think it's a one size fits all. It definitely is not. In some denominations of Christianity, the Bible is not that important. In other versions, the version of the Bible used, the rhetoric is drastically different. In some, it's simply that this is the way it used to be, but since the time of Jesus, things have gotten a lot better. As if Jesus somehow fixed things, even though I can't find where he did. And then there's also like a lot of Stockholm syndrome in Christianity. There are a lot of women who are like, oh, well, women are a second-class citizen in the Bible because that's what we're supposed to be. It's the curse of Eve. We rebelled and we caused all the harm in the world, and we shouldn't have the right to make decisions. There have been recent interviews with people at at the big Trump 250 rally, so people were going out and they were interviewing a bunch of Christian women, and some of them were saying that they would be fine if women lost the right to vote because they always vote the same way as their husbands, so their vote shouldn't really matter.
You serious?
Yeah. And this is something I have heard relatives of mine saying since the 1980s, that women really shouldn't be voting because,
I know someone who says that.
they shouldn't have, like, they could mess things up, and I'm like, are you like, religion can do a number on a person's mind. And I think that's one of the reasons, like, we have to look at people who, are devoutly religious, people that we might look to as, opponents in, our beliefs, our politics, our society, whatever, and realize that these people are victims of a terrible idea that has permeated culture for thousands of years. I mean, you have people literally walking the streets today. I guarantee there are people you have bumped into in the last week who believe that, who honestly think that women, I guarantee, Ethan, you have bumped into women in the last week that honestly believe they should lose most of their rights because that's just their proper place.
I know of women who think that way, so.
Yeah, that's how it is because it's indoctrination. That's how some of these people can believe it because they were raised to believe it. They were made to believe it. They were spoon-fed this from the time they were old enough to understand their language. I mean, that's some of them. Others kind of chose it.
Right.
Because I also know people who were not raised to have such extreme beliefs and gladly just walked right into it. That's the ones I don't understand. And I'm related to people like that too. So it's odd, it's bizarre. The human mind does strange things sometimes. And so I think on the surface level, I can kind of answer some of that question, but after a while, I think you have to talk to a psychiatrist to get a better answer. There's a sociological study out there somewhere that answers your question far better than I ever could.
So let me ask you this. And I feel like, I've never done this on the air before. I feel like, and I'm going to invite you to it right now, I would love to do a second interview with you because normally I want to talk and get to know my guest on a personal level.
Okay.
But this has just been purely educational, which is fine with me. I love it. So formal invitation right now. I would love, you don't have to give me an answer at this second. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I would love to bring you back a second time because okay. I want to get to know you better, though. That's the thing. I feel guilty. You're just like feeding me knowledge, but I haven't gotten to know you at all. But so here's my question, though. And I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, would Jesus be considered a Jew or a Christian?
It kind of depends on which Jesus you're looking at. The Jesus of Mathew, absolutely Jewish. The Jesus of John hated Jews. One was like, the Jesus of the Gospel of John did. He straight up curses them. The Jesus of Mathew is like, he obeys Jewish law, and even when he doesn't have to, he's like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Just because we should. We should follow every letter of the law until the Lord comes in power and glory. And then the Jesus of the Gospel of John is he's like the anti-Semitic Mel Gibson Jesus. He's like, I can see why the Gospel of John is popular among certain groups of Christians. Like the ones who wear like the white robes with the pointy hoods and stuff. They love the Gospel of John. Yeah, that Jesus is a whole different character. Each gospel has its own Jesus. He's kind of created in their own image.
Okay.
He's like a sock puppet. Um, you know, so yeah, it depends on which Jesus you're talking about.
Okay.
It depends on which book you read, basically.
Okay. Um, what I forgot to ask you, if you could send me the links where people can check you out at, so I can add them to the description of the
Oh,
video.
awesome.
But
Yeah, I'll do
if
that.
you could tell people right now who are watching, where can people check you out at?
So you can go to dragonsandgenesis.com. I've got links to all my stuff on there. You can also find me on YouTube. Just search Dragons in Genesis and look for the big orange logo with a silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. Again, easy to find. I'm the only one with a kaiju in the logo. You could also get any podcast app. You know, Google Play or whatever Google's podcast app is called now. Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spreaker, Good Pods, whatever, and just search Dragons in Genesis. And again, look for Godzilla. You'll find me. I'm all over the place.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you to my patrons, especially Cindy Plaza. I'm going to keep telling you how amazing you are because you have supported me from day one. You are the reason I got a Patreon, and you've never stopped. So thank you. I love you to death. Jason, definitely we got to do a part 2. But everyone, thanks for watching, and have a good night.